What's up, poopers? I apologize for the delayed update. Now, as I said in some earlier videos, I wanted to start covering other MMOs and I got pulled into playing an MMO called Neverwinter. Now, Neverwinter was fun for a while, but its incredibly large amount of exploits turned it into a, I wonder how I can cheat in this dungeon sort of game. And I burned out on it quickly and I've been killing time playing League of Legends, waiting for the next big MMO. But that got me thinking, what exactly makes a big MMO nowadays? Right now, the genre really hit its big following with World of Warcraft. It did wonders, not just for MMOs, but for gamers as a whole. And now that a lot of players have been burned out of WoW or their beloved old school MMO, whatever it may be, they are trying to recreate that fun and satisfaction in new upcoming MMOs, but none seem to be working. Well, the purpose of this video is to try and understand why I think that is, and what will make it easier for you to find the next big MMO in the future, so let's get started. Boop. First, let's talk about combat. Gaming has evolved a lot over the past 30 years, but its core remains the same. Gaming is math with visual graphics. You use equations given to you to outsmart your enemy's equations, or you use luck. The MMORPG genre started just as RPG, which started as tabletop gaming like D&D. The graphics were your imagination, with sometimes visual aids such as a map or drawings, and the calculations on damage were done with a roll of the dice or with your stats. Now, RPGs evolved into card games, and those evolved into text adventures on computers, where you could go on an adventure using only your imagination and typing in words. Now, technology has advanced more, and then games with turn-based combat came into play. RPGs where you would choose attacks to use on enemies, and the game would roll dice for you and decide the damage, and then in turn you would take damage from your enemy's attacks. This was more D&D style fighting, only this time it was much more interactive and reactive with the visual aids of video games. Now, this visual aid grew from 2D to polygonal 3D, and it was then that it upgraded from simply turn-based combat RPGs like Final Fantasy or those other old games to real-time combat in both single-player RPGs and MMOs. Computers were now not only able to calculate skill damage for you, but they were able to calculate positional factors such as line of sight, range, etc. And the visual aids given by 3D graphics on these calculations created a boom in popularity for RPGs and MMORPGs. Those who didn't have the wild imagination to enjoy typical D&D games could now enjoy RPGs because the visuals of these role-playing worlds were now being presented in 3D on their computer screens. Now, at the time, targeting was still required. Tracking positions of both spells, attacks, and characters was too much for computers. But we reached an evolutionary point where programming and computers are allowing the calculation of not only character positions, but the positions of attacks and spells, even such attacks so minuscule as a sword swing. We've entered the era of true action combat, as Terra called it, and many new MMOs are adopting this combat style. In fact, any MMO still using the old click-based combat is completely being ignored unless it was released prior to this era. You can see this with the failing of Blade and Soul and Archage in Korea, who both used point and click, releasing after some true action combat games. While all the newer NA games like WildStar, Elder Scrolls Online, Dragon's Prophet, and Neverwinter have all adapted to the new technology to bring MMOs further to life. With technology, once you reach the next level, it's hard to take a step backwards. Just like now, those enjoying the MMO combat requiring aiming have trouble going back to target-based MMOs, I imagine in the future, those playing virtual reality MMOs won't be able to enjoy playing a game with their keyboard. And sure, there will always be those classic, simple, nostalgic RPGs you still want to play, but as generations move on, they will desire to play more advanced MMOs, as technology is advancing our ability to make MMOs immersive. And that's what an MMORPG. It's a second immersive world from reality. A hardcore gamer sees the world of an MMORPG appealing because unlike other RPGs, there are others in this world to share the experience with, bringing the world to life even further. Us nerds who once had to imagine these fantasy worlds in our heads, sitting around a table at night, rolling dice to go on exciting adventures in D&D, now instead can log onto a computer and battle giant monsters in real time with friends, with fast-paced combat where every decision matters. That's what playing an MMO is all about. So, why are so many MMOs falling flat lately? Well, my personal belief is that the players are actually the ones killing the immersion themselves, which prevents communities from developing in these new MMOs. Now, for an MMO to be successful, it has to become a fantasy world that people feel like other people are living in, else it's just an empty world, and if you wanted to play adventures by yourself, you'd play a single-player RPG, right? I believe there are several core problems causing this, and I'd like to go over each of the 3 of them. Boop. Now, the first one is bad companies. They're only investing in the genre to make money. They've seen the MMO market boom in the past few years. Now, they don't have the vision to create this amazing immersive worlds for players to go on adventures in. They are creating a world that has the features and mini games that players want so that they'll buy the game. The passion that those nerds had sitting around that D&D table in their fantasy adventure world just isn't there. It's missing from these games. To some companies, they look at MMOs simply from the business perspective to make money. You can see this with the overly saturated market of MMOs that appeal to niche groups, receiving next to no content updates after releases and are just completely generic with no originality or original story or characters or anything. The second problem, I think, is automation. Now, this is hugely debatable, but in my opinion, an MMO is not a genre where automation works. MMORPG is a massive multiplayer online role-playing game. It needs to have the massive world feeling. The moment automation is enabled, it is like a huge slam in the immersibility of that world. When I can log into a game without having to leave the city and enter battlegrounds or dungeons just by clicking a button, it turns the world into a game lobby, no different than the League of Legends login screen. Sure, in an MMO lobby, I can hop around the town, see other players, do emotes, chat, but by simply automating travel, you have killed the world of immersion. The counter-argument to this is that traveling takes too much time, or finding a group is too hard. Well, yes, they are. Sometimes servers have low populations, sometimes it's late at night, and sometimes you want to just quest while looking for a dungeon group on the side. So automation solves all of these problems and makes it more convenient and easier to play. This is a great thing, right? In my opinion, wrong. The simple act of automating everything in a game, such as travel and group finding, completely kills a huge amount of immersion, especially at endgame content. It seriously hinders community development, and I mean seriously hinders it. In open world MMOs, players have no need to communicate or work together with each other, because in any situation they require help, they can just click a button to get a group, or in some cases they are already playing with friends, obviously. Now, if you just click a button every time, it barely feels like a community, because even if you don't like this healer or you really like this DPS, it doesn't matter. Next time you can click a button and you'll get new ones. You cannot automate a world whose sole purpose is to be an immersive fantasy world. Whoever thought starting MMO automation was a good idea is an idiot. And since its implementation to every MMO, it's been impossible for people to recreate that epic fantasy world feeling that they once got from Vanilla WoW or World Aeon PvP or Dark Age of Camelot PvP or EverQuest huge raids. The feeling of being the badass everyone knows or that funny guy, it's gone because communities are failing to form in these new MMOs because MMOs has turned into a capital city equivalent of Tokyo where everyone is busy doing their own thing with no need to interact with others. The last thing I believe is lacking in MMOs is exclusivity. Now, for a fantasy world to truly feel epic, some players have to be allowed to stand on top. Everyone cannot be equal. If it's too easy for everyone to beat the hardest content, then everyone will have done it. Everyone will be the best and on the same level. There will be nothing to strive for. Now, right now, the extent of being the best in MMOs is mostly who can clear the content first, which roughly translates into who has the most free time with moderate skill when the content becomes available. Once the race is over, Most content is eventually still beaten by everyone. There aren't really any parts of an MMO that feel unachievable. In most, you only need to work a bit on your gear and you are at the same level as everybody else. Prior, MMOs that gave you the epic feeling did have that exclusive feel. Incredibly hard gear that took hours and hours and hours of work just to obtain. Bosses that required tons of consumables and deaths even to make 1% of progress on his hit point bar. Dungeons that required huge amounts of work just to be able to get inside. The exclusivity gave people something to work for, something that felt so incredibly good when they achieved it that they sat in that world, soaked up the satisfaction, and then prepared to move on to the next challenging achievement. So if these three things are true, then why are no companies making non-automated, non-exclusive MMOs anymore? The sad truth is that the epic feeling you got from those first generation MMOs was because they were designed for first generation fantasy players. These nerds out there that truly wanted that epic fantasy feeling, that immersion into another world, they are as rare as they once were. They only seem less rare because a visual aid was given to these fantasy worlds in MMOs. They attracted a larger audience than those immersion-seeking hardcore nerds, and that larger audience doesn't care so much about living in this awesome, epic-feeling, immersive fantasy world. They are the next generation that care about being badass, being the best, fast, because they don't have the time to enjoy the new world. And now that the larger audience has come to MMOs, the games are being catered to them for the sake of profit. And it's the same crowd that is the reason none of these new MMOs are becoming the next big epic MMO. I believe that what kept WoW, like some other MMOs, alive so long are the first generation nerds who want to be immersed in amazing worlds, and until a new MMO can attract and sustain the attention of those first generation MMO players, they will continue to only be hyped, be played through, and then tossed aside in the vicious cycle being experienced by titles released recently. So with this being said, here's to hoping that some of the new upcoming MMOs I'll be covering somehow manage to make themselves feel epic and immersive despite their catering to the generation of automation and convenience. Good luck to ESO and WildStar. I'll be focusing my videos with news updates on these two games. Now obviously no footage until the NDAs are lifted. So I'll see you guys later. Booping out. Boop.